how to mix green watercolour. Today I have 10 useful recipes for you. Welcome back to my channel. If we haven't met before, my name is Michelle, and on this channel you'll find all things watercolour and a little bit of mixed media too. Please do consider subscribing. On a Thursday I make one free video here for you on YouTube with extra content on Saturdays for my Patreon subscribers. If you click the bell icon, you can get notified every time I have a new video for you. So today I'm going to share with you 10 really natural looking greens, some of my favourite recipes. Now what I'll do as well is I'll timestamp the video, so you'll be able to come back later on, have a look in the description, find the green you want, or just scroll through and you'll be able to find them in timestamps so you can come back and look at a particular recipe. But you want to watch the whole video first of all, because I'm going to show you not just which colours you need to mix together, but also the quantities and the water levels that you need to use. Now within each of these individual greens there are a multitude of other greens. So if I tell you to mix a green that's mostly a particular yellow with a little bit of a particular blue in, of course you can add more of that blue, you can add less of the yellow, you can take it even further with the yellow, you can add more or less water and more or less pigment. So within each of these greens I show you today, you could, if you wanted to, and it's a good exercise if you're a beginner, you get a little piece of paper and see how many different greens you can mix just from each colour combination that I give you today. But I'm going to give you the ones that I think are most useful and show you how to mix them in the ways that I think will be most useful for your landscape painting and for your botanical work. So over in my Facebook group, and there's a link to that below in the description if you'd like to join us. Over in my Facebook group I've been asked about making videos about greens more than any other subject recently, and I'm going to do some other videos about greens. I'm going to do a video showing you how you can adjust your ready-made greens if they're a bit too bright and unnatural, how you can make them into lots of other combinations of much more useful greens. I'm also going to do a video about how to mix any green, once you've looked at a green, how to analyse it and how to mix any green that you see. However, that's a little bit more advanced and we're getting a little bit more into colour theory today. I'm just going to stick to basic recipes. So if you don't understand colour theory, if you find it really hard to get your head around, I'm just going to give you the recipes today. So I'm going to point the camera downwards now and show you how it's done. So for our first green, I've got one of my favourites. I tend to use this one for painting spring grass. It's a really, it's bright and cheerful, but it's also quite delicate in nature. So for all of these colour mixes today, I'm going to use fairly commonly found colours. So most of them should be in a beginner's set. There may be one or two others. And where I'm using different colours, I will give you alternatives to those colours so that you can mix something that's at least a bit similar. So I'm not going to use any colours that are completely sort of obscure and little unusual colours or bespoke colours. I'm not going to use anything like that. So I'm going to use standard colours that most of you will have already at least a large proportion of in your painting boxes. So here I have some lemon yellow, and you'll see this one is by Jackman's Art Materials, and they are a British company making artist quality paints. And you can see that with lemon, it's a pale colour, it's bright, it's slightly acidy, it tends towards the green end of the spectrum, which means that you'll always get lovely, bright, fresh greens when mixing from lemon. And it's a basic, so there are not that many colours that I would say you have to have, but you really do have to have a lemon yellow in your set. So if you haven't got one, do add one in. I'm going to add in here, I've just started adding in some cerulean blue. And cerulean blue, the one I'm using here is by Talon's Rembrandt. Another really good brand. Now it's really important with cerulean to consider the quality, because if you've got a student's quality set of paints, it's absolutely fine to start with student's quality paints, nothing wrong with them. However, there are one or two pigments that just don't always do well in the student's ranges, and one of them is cerulean and another would be ultramarine. And the reason for this is that those happen to be quite expensive pigments, and so they're the ones that get sort of watered down and get other pigments swapped in or cheaper pigments used. Even if the tube, it says it's exactly the same pigment, there still can be a difference in quality. So have a look carefully at your cerulean blue. There's not that many cerulean blues that I'm impressed with. This Talon's Rembrandt one is good. Also another one that's pretty good is Daniel Smith. So just do have a look at your cerulean blue. If it looks rather mucky and murky, consider just swapping that particular colour out for another brand. The same goes for ultramarine. Ultramarine is also one that in cheaper brands might look a bit murky. So I've mixed here from the lemon yellow, put a bit of cerulean in, and here we go. Let's swatch that It's a little bit darker than I wanted. I'm going to add a bit more of the yellow in actually, and we'll mix it straight on the paper. So this is a fantastic fresh bright green. It's not too acid, but it's just so beautiful. It's lovely for, I often use it for sort of if I'm painting that fresh sort of grass or fresh shoots of leaves and things that have just come up in the spring. There we are. So that's lemon yellow and cerulean blue. So if that green was good for spring grass, this next one I've got for you is really good for summer grass. So it's not quite as bright and is a little bit deeper, but still has a freshness to it. So I'm starting with lemon yellow again, and this time I'm adding in ultramarine blue. So let's swatch this colour here. Now what we're getting is a slightly darker, slightly duller green. I'll add actually a little bit more lemon in so that you can see we can make it a little bit brighter, but it's just a bit more of a natural green, and you will get this with ultramarine. Without going too much into colour theory, there's always a touch of red in ultramarine. It tends towards the red end of the spectrum. Now that means that in essence you're adding the third primary colour into your yellow and your blue, which will dull it down. So here we've got another nice, fairly fresh but quite natural green. This is a really, really useful one. You don't want to overdo the ultramarine in your green painting. Don't put ultramarine in absolutely everything, because you want to contrast these more natural greens with the fresher greens. Now this next green is the only one where we're going to mix three colours together, but they're three really basic colours and you're going to find it such a useful green. This is a green that you would use if you get those plants in the garden that are almost silver in colour, so that real pale sort of soft grey green. So it's back to the first mix, which is lemon and cerulean, but with this one we're going to add a bit of Payne's Grey and more water. So the reason Payne's Grey can be added is because although it's grey, it's majority blue pigment. In fact, all greys are majority blue pigment. So what it's going to do is it's going to give you this lovely sort of cool, soft grey green. I'm going to use Payne's Grey later in this video to make some darker colours, but in this one I just want to show you how you can make that real sort of pale silver grey. I'm going to add a bit more of the cerulean in. You know the green that's barely green at all, it's almost grey. So let's swatch this one. Remembering as well that watercolour always dries about 50% lighter, or up to 50% lighter I should say. So we're going to add this one here, and of course if you want it paler than this you can just add more water, so you've got this beautiful soft grey green. Another tip when using cerulean or ultramarine is that they granulate heavily. They will start to separate on your palette, so just want to give them a little stir with your paintbrush each time you dip in. Next we have a much more muted, more granular green, and this one I call kiwi green because it's almost the exact colour of the outside of a kiwi fruit. So I'm starting now with yellow ochre, and yellow ochre is technically categorised as an earth colour, which means it's very, very opaque, and it's very grainy and granular and rather mucky compared to some of the other yellows. It's a really useful colour actually as a starting base for things like sand and sandy pathways, things like that. But you can also mix some really interesting kind of murky sort of greens from it. So what I'm going to do now is add cobalt blue to this. Now if you don't have cobalt blue you can use ultramarine. Obviously the effect won't be identical, but it'll be very similar. It'll be actually slightly duller. Cobalt blue is probably closest to ultramarine, so I'm going to add my cobalt blue here, and you see we get this lovely sort of muted green, and again it's a colour that's very, very suitable for painting kiwi fruit, but you know, also for things like moss. The thing with greens is you want to have both bright fresh greens and also muted greens. You don't want to just have your whole painting overwhelmed with one or the other. If you've only got very bright greens, it'll look very, very unnatural. And if you've only got muddy greens like this, it'll look very, very dull and murky. So I'm helping you today to mix both fresh greens and more muted colours. This next green is very soft and it's a good one for painting things like trees that you see in the distance. So this time I'm starting with Naples yellow, which is probably the most unusual colour I'm using today, but it's still included in a lot of the bigger beginners sets. So you can see it's somewhat related to the yellow ochre we used, but it's a lot creamier, it's slightly more opaque and slightly less granular and less dark. But if you don't have it, you can experiment with using other yellows as well. Now to this one, I'm going to add Prussian blue. Prussian blue is a strong staining dark blue. You'll need at least one staining blue pigment in your palette in order to get very dark greens. I've got 3 or 4, but probably the one that you'll come across the first is Prussian, and it's a rather greenish, sort of a green greyish dark blue. And I'm going to pop some of this into my Naples yellow. I'm not going to put too much in because it really would go far too dark. And here we've got this kind of soft, muted, kind of bluish green. And it's really, really useful for painting those sort of distant tree lines, because anything that's a bit cooler, a bit bluer, will recede and go away from you. So it's dark, but it's not too dark, because if you go too strong with distant trees, then they tend to come forward. So this is another really useful mix. This is Naples yellow and Prussian blue. We're going to make a very soft yellow-based green now. This is good for things like sedum plants in the autumn. At this point, if you're getting some value from this video, could I ask you quickly just to press the like button, please? YouTube rewards channels that have a lot of audience interaction, so anything you do, like liking the video, sharing the video, subscribing, or leaving me a comment, they're all free to do and they all help my channel to grow a little bit faster so I can teach more people. Next up, I'm starting with Cadmium Yellow Deep. This is another paint by Jackman's, and if you'd like a 10% discount off of Jackman's paints, I do have a code you can grab in the description of the video. We're going to make a quite sort of a watery pale yellow green. Now this is a very orange yellow. The other one I've got actually is Tanner's Rembrandt, which is a little more yellow based. The Jackman's is a little bit more orangey, but all Cadmium Yellow Deeps are this kind of warm egg yolky colour. So really, really useful for mixing warm greens. Cadmiums will also always be slightly opaque, but it nevertheless gives very bright, fresh greens. Now what I'm going to add to this one is some more cobalt blue. So cobalt isn't too bright a colour, so we're just going to add a little bit there, and really hardly any at all. In fact, I'm going to add some more yellow to that because I just want to get this real yellow green going on. And a little more water, and then we're going to swatch. So this is a colour that I think of for those sort of faded autumn plants there. Having a little bit of resistance on the paper. That's my own fault because I've got sun cream on my arms. It's actually warm in England today, which is obviously some form of mistake. There we are. I've got this lovely sort of soft yellow green that verges on being brown. This next green is much punchier. I'm going to show you how to mix a nice fresh lime green. Next I'm starting with Indian yellow. Another colour that's very similar to this is transparent yellow. There's a Winsor & Newton transparent yellow. Now although this one looks in the palette a lot like the Cadmium Yellow Deep, it's actually a very transparent colour. So Indian yellow, they're very, very transparent and sunny, so you'll get lovely bright transparent greens with this one. I'm going to add another transparent colour to it, and that's phthalo blue. So in this case I'm going to use the SAA Tropical Phthalo Blue, but any phthalo blue will do. If you don't have phthalo blue, you can use Prussian again, but you won't get such a bright effect. And what we're going for here is much more of a sort of a lime green. So we're getting this fresh yellow based green now. Forgive any uneven application, it's entirely because I have lent on the paper with sun cream on my arms, which is something you shouldn't do because as you can see it blocks the paint a little bit. So there we are, we've got a nice fresh lime green. Of course if you want it more lime and more transparent and more yellow, you just add more yellow to that mix. Another very warm green now, and this one is great for autumn foliage. So starting again with Indian yellow, I want this real sort of bright autumn foliage, autumn tree look. So I'm going to add some cobalt blue to this, but really the tiniest amount. So just to barely tip it away from yellow. This is why I said to you, you want to be adding your blue in just a little bit at a time. It can get to the point, you know, if you've got a mix that's gone far too blue, you know, you really will end up adding, you know, half a tube of yellow before you ever adjust. It's sometimes better to start again. So here we have this lovely autumn foliage colour, and as I said, it's mostly Indian yellow, which was originally many years ago made with cow's urine. I hope it's not anymore, I'm pretty sure it's not. And then we've just added a tiny touch of cobalt blue just to push it into this autumn colour. So whereas some of them are almost into green or almost into brown, this one is almost a yellow. It's kind of that cusp of yellow and green. Beautiful colour for autumn foliage, and that's Indian yellow, cobalt blue. Next we're going to paint a really natural dull dark green. This one's great for tree painting and also for some of those greens that you might see when the sun's starting to go down. So for this mix I'm going back to the lemon yellow, but we're adding Payne's grey to it, and quite a lot as well. What I want here is a really dark dull green. So if you've got trees, things like that, you're going to need to mix a dark green, and you're going to need a staining colour. So the staining colours you can use for greens would be Prussian or phthalo or indigo works, as well as Payne's grey. So I'm mixing in to get it darker and darker, but it's still going to be a green. So when you need to drop those really natural, really muted dark greens into your trees, here we have Payne's grey and lemon yellow. It's a really, really fabulous strong colour. And some of these weaker colours may not look much on the paper, but once you get a dark colour next to them, then it really, really helps. So there's our lemon yellow and Payne's grey, a beautiful muted dark green. Another very dark green now, but this one's just a little bit fresher. So starting again with lemon, this time I'm going to add Prussian blue. Now you could use indigo or phthalo, you'd get slightly different results with each of those. With phthalo you'll get something brighter, and with indigo you'll get something duller. We're just going to keep adding this strong staining blue until it goes really, really dark, but doesn't quite tip fully into blue because of that touch of yellow that we started with. So you can see we're already getting a nice dark green, and as I apply it you'll be able to see the difference between this and the one that we made with Payne's grey, which is much duller. There's no such thing as a wrong or right green, it's just a matter of what sort of green you want where. Now if you're living somewhere where there's a lot of fir trees, you're painting fir trees, this also can be a great colour for pines because it's bluish without being too unnatural and too bright. So see the difference there between this one, which is very sort of blue based, and this one, which is much warmer and much duller. Do remember that even colours with the same name vary between brands, so you may get slightly different results to me. So I do encourage you to make your colour chart so that you've always got this lovely selection of greens to choose from. Do let me know in the comments which of these is your favourite green, and also share some of your own recipes as well so that other people can benefit. As always, a special thank you to those of you who support me on Patreon. If you'd like to see what extra content I have for you on Patreon, do click the link in the video description. And if you'd like some practical help on using the greens that we've mixed today, do have a look at the video I have up for you next. It's all about painting distant trees in watercolour, and you can watch that one right now.